the GenAI in TeacherEd Summit 2025?
Looks like they are getting together to work out how to use us.
We better watch what they are doing then.
Just a short introduction to Miles, because he definitely does deserve it. Thank you, Miles. So Miles is a professor of computing education at Roehampton. He is the most fabulous human ever, a knowledgeable human. He knows everybody who does anything with computing, and he has done some absolutely amazing work. I cannot praise Miles highly enough. He's also been part of various Department for Education resourcing, and the recent, you may have seen him in the recent Chartered College Safe and Effective Use of AI in Education materials as well. So he's famous, and we want your signature, don't we, Miles? Okay, over to you, Miles. Enough buttering you up.
I'm hoping that people can hear me. I can't tell whether people can hear me. So somebody just who I can see, Victoria, a thumbs up would be helpful.
I can hear you.
Now I've got that from you. That's great. Okay, here we go. So I've been doing this game for a number of years now. So I moved to Roehampton. I reckon it would have been 2009 when the world was really a very, very different place. It seems so long since I've had an opportunity to talk about technology in teacher education. I've just looked through my academic CV. I know I was giving talks around technology in teacher education back in 2011. I managed to find some of those slides online. Let's see whether the Q&A that I have to do now. So fingers crossed, ask a question. So with a bit of, no, that's the wrong set of slides. I will post it later. So it's been a long time. Suddenly this whole artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, brings this back up the agenda really very, very quickly for us, as this is now something which we ought to be using in our line of work, which our students are definitely using in their academic studies, which they are also using in their professional practice out in school, and they will need to use in their professional practice when they leave us. And of course, it's a big part of what the world that they are preparing their pupils for. So all of a sudden, a technology arrives and we change how we think about these things. My focus for our talk this afternoon is around this idea of using the generative AI to support them in their training, which may or may not be on that long list of things that I said mattered earlier. But before I get on to that, a couple of bits of preliminaries. So I'm sure you will all have had a look at the curriculum and assessment review, which was published, it's like a couple of weeks ago now, very recently at any rate. And then the government's response to that, and that didn't quite get as much attention as the CAR itself did. Hidden in the government's response to the CAR is this thing about the importance of adaptive teaching and assessment and high expectations for all. And then they bury there at the end of that paragraph with a full review of the ITT ECF planned for 2027. So my guess is that something around, there will be much more reference to technology in initial teacher education in the new edition of that. And I think it very likely that there will be some nod in the direction of generative AI and what new teachers need to know about this technology. There is an opportunity for this group, I'm sure, to feed into what goes on to that next set of standards. My guess is that it's not likely to be too far removed from the lovely work which Chiltern Learning Trust and the Chartered College of Teaching did in terms of professional development for teachers, already qualified teachers. Of course, there's nothing to stop you using this with trainee teachers as well. I think they've got a good structure to this, where we start with an understanding of what AI is, and then how it can be used. And then, of course, this really important bit about using it safely, as well as, of course, advice for school leaders in that. It is interesting that they don't talk about AI as something to support inclusion and access to the curriculum, when we know that's actually the only bit that gets into the current edition of the ITT ECF. My guess is that the next edition of these materials is likely to include that at the very least. My job is a trainer of computing teachers, so I get to talk a little about computer science, and you're going to have to forgive me here because I want to do the science bit of the talk, because I think there are a couple of things which one needs to know before we get into using bots and creating bots to support trainees in their professional formation. So the first bit is this notion of it is simply predictive text. Okay, it's very, very good predictive text. If I type in here, let me see if I can get this right, because the capitalization and the punctuation matters. I bring into my Markov chain demo here the Wikipedia article. Oh, isn't Wikipedia awesome? I get very, very worried that it's going to get polluted by the generative AIs and how much the large language model firms are drawing on Wikipedia without paying anything back to Wikipedia. Anyhow, off that particular soapbox. So these are the bigrams. These are the two-word combinations that come up in that Wikipedia article. So when the word approach appears, the next word is based 44% of the time, is 11% of the time, to 44% of the time. So we can just look at those byword combinations and generate something based on those probabilities. We put a word down and then roll the dice, and the next word is determined by the previous word. So after rapidly, we choose and. After and, we choose supported, rapidly and supported in a role model. Teaching and other professionals reflect. It is gibberish, even though I'm talking very quickly. If I power this up to tetragrams, that's 4-word combinations, we have to look down quite a way before we see more than one option. So we look at the 3 previous words, and that determines the probabilities of the 4th choice here, the 4th word. Once you have the first, second, third, you choose the 4th, the second, third, 4th predicts the 5th, and so on. And so we produce this iteratively, recursively. Skills for better socioeconomics outcomes, multiple identities, multiple identities. A teacher educator must be highly competent first-order educator. A good teacher, but also skilled second-order educator. Do you not think this is so much better? And all we're looking at here is 4-word combinations. Of course, ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, all the other big language models are way more powerful than just the 3 previous words. They have a huge context window. So let me move over to, I think this is using Llama 3 with 8 billion parameters. And I say 5 ways to improve teacher education using AI. And of course, it goes off and generates text, which we've all come to know and love over the last, 3 years? Is it really that short period of time? What you see here, though, is a heat map of how likely the choice was. So we have here in bullet point 1, by analyzing what? Analyzing was the very likely one. Analyzing data. The probability model said the best word to put down here, the most likely word, would have been individual, and then by analyzing learning. But it rolled the dice and got a low score, and so picked data as its next token to play. Once it has put that token down, the next token, the on, is determined by that one and all of the preceding words, the preceding tokens that we've played so far. The consequence of this, or one consequence of this, is hallucination is pretty much baked into the system here. Once it plays a weird word, once it gets a low score and puts something strange down, all of the subsequent tokens must take that into account. And thus you get, it is not lying, it is making stuff up, though, and it becomes quite obsessively convinced of this, as perhaps some of our trainees do from time to time. I was interested when I ran this through earlier. Its second bullet point was simulation-based training. AI-powered simulation tools can recreate real-world scenarios, allowing education students to practice, and hone their skills in a safe and controlled environment. And it goes on in similar vein. I'm really impressed that Llama spotted that as its second most likely one, because the thing which I'm going to show you next is based on not just the language model, but giving it documents to work from. So rather than just your prompt and all of the tokens it's played, we minimize this chance of hallucination by giving it lots more as part of that context window, by uploading a document, by uploading a source file to it and saying, okay, base your response not just on my prompt, not just on the language model itself, but on the document I've just given you. And once you move into this retrieval-augmented generation territory, the chance of a hallucination drops, I think, considerably. Okay, so I'm going to show you some of the ones which we've built at Roehampton. If you've got access to the slides, and I think you all have got access to the slides, these should have live links on them. So the first we built for ourselves is the ITT policy bot. So this has been given all of the DfE's and Ofsted's pronouncements on what we have to do in initial teacher education. So I should be able to swap over to this and ask it a sensible question about this. Do trainee teachers need to use AI in their lesson planning? Let's have a look what it says. Okay, and it's coming up soon. Never do live demos for these things. I think it's coming up soon. Yes! Okay. Trainee teachers are not explicitly required or mandated to use AI in their lesson planning. Here's a detailed breakdown. This should come as no surprise to anybody joining on the call. Mandatory content, plan and teach well-structured lessons, plan effective lessons. I'm hoping it comes up with, while a trainee might choose to use AI as a system or tool to achieve these outcomes or enhance efficiency, the framework mandates the pedagogical outcome, not the use of a specific tool. I think that's probably okay, but you may be doing things differently. And of course, because this is the wonderful Notebook LM, we get to listen to the incredibly enthusiastic podcast about all of this work here. Fingers crossed. This, hopefully you can hear that. I'm not going to play you all 34 minutes of that. That's something which you can listen to at your discretion. Andy has got a thumbs down. I'm curious about that. So that's one of the ones we've built. Another one which we built, this is my colleague Paul Dickerson over in our psychology department. We're so conscious of so many of our trainees, I want to say cheating, using the AI to support them with the academic side of the course, that we want them to use that technology better. So again, Retrieval-Augmented Generation, they upload the assignment brief, they upload the draft of their assignment and ask the bot for feedback on what they have written so far. This is the sort of thing which they are welcome to do with us as their tutors. Very few of us have the time to do that, but it turns out that the language models are very, very good at giving that sort of detailed feedback on a draft submission, particularly when fed as part of this Retrieval-Augmented Generation process, the assignment brief to start from. So this is one from a master's student, and how many of us have had to write in our feedback to our students that they need to strengthen the ontology versus epistemology distinction. Ontological critique is insightful but appears late. Introduce the difference between epistemology and ontology earlier to frame your later arguments. So that sort of really digging deep feedback is very capable of doing it. We don't think this sort of feedback from the language model is cheating, and I hope you wouldn't either. Of course, the thing that students really want to know is, so what mark does this get? Paul has built in very good guardrails, which actually say, do not ever give a grade. We want to avoid the situation where the student says, the bot gave me a 78%, but the tutor has only given me 68% of this. Which of these is correct? Who knows? We may get to the point of the bots at least helping with the essay grading process at some point, but not for us yet. We also encourage students to use it as part of their reading. So I will set them something to read in preparation for a lecture. I've got no problem with them uploading that text to Notebook LM. Again, it would be my preferred source for that, and producing an incredibly enthusiastic podcast version of that. Yes, they will miss important nuance and subtlety, but this makes the academic readings much more accessible than struggling with sometimes quite lengthy journal articles which have not been written for beginning teachers in mind. You may feel differently. More of this later. I don't know, I feel, similarly about lesson planning as I do about them using it to write essays. I feel they do need to learn how to plan and teach well-structured lessons, with the emphasis on the plan there. But I will show them the stuff which Oak and the other sort of teaching-specific applications of the large language models do. And without any trace of irony, here is Isla producing a lovely lesson plan with those 3 learning cycles that we know from Oak about how to discuss copyright and intellectual property in Key Stage 4. If anybody should know about this, the large language models should. My worry is that relying on these tools, or even using these to any great extent, takes the thinking out of it, and thus there is much less learning happens when all of the thinking is outsourced to the machine. I think there is a middle ground where they can support us in our thinking rather than doing our thinking for us. You know, the famous Willingham quote here about, what is it, memory is the residue of thought. The more you think about something, the more likely it is that you will remember it later. This matters when it comes to these craft skills, this professional practice of a teacher. This cannot be outsourced to the machine. Okay, we move on into this territory of digital approximations of practice. And I'll show you some of the ones which we've done for this as well. So this was back in the ITT market review, 2021, that's under a previous government, that this notion that there should be, during the ITAP particularly, this opportunity to approximate teaching. You didn't have to do all of those craft skills, what is it, how many things it is, 63 things Lemov says a teacher has to be able to do. You can practice a lot of those outside of the actual classroom. So you've rehearsed this, you've got good at these granular craft skills, you go into the room, and then you're much better at doing this when there are real life kids there in the room with you. So this notion of approximations of teaching, imitating a classroom situation, providing opportunities of practice similar to actual teaching, but with lower stakes. Lots and lots of ways of doing this, this notion of a simulation of a teaching situation. Of course, it occurs that the AIs can provide something like that experience. I was very inspired by Victoria's work with the wonderful lesson inspector, so I thought maybe I would have a go at building one of those of my own. So I have a lesson plan review bot here that will accept the trainee's lesson plan, that will link that or use the Retrieval-Augmented Generation, basing its advice on government policy about what we know in the ITT ECF good teaching looks like, and provide some feedback on the lesson plan. Mentors will do this. We as tutors will do this for our trainees, but this is a much lower stakes way of just, how is my lesson plan looking? Is there anything that I should do differently here? In fact, the example given here is not a trainee's own lesson plan, but is that one which I produced via Isla for that copyright lesson. It goes off, because this is using full strength GPT 5.1, reads the document, user has uploaded a lesson plan and all of this. Lesson plan covers good points, benefit from strategies like retrieving knowledge from earlier units, sequencing from simpler to complex concepts. So it's really very good targeted advice on the lesson plan that the trainee has uploaded, drawing on all of the official policy about what we think good teaching looks like. When you build one of these, I'll come back to that in a moment. When you build one of these, you get to choose the knowledge base. So I'm fairly traditionalist in my approaches here, as those of you who know me will know. I've given it, the standard text here. I've given it Rosenshine. I've given it a document on active learning. So there's nothing surprising in here. Here is the prompt. And of course, there are some guardrails in place, although I'm conscious that experts on the call here will do their level best to break this for me. So it's not making up gibberish advice. It is basing it on what we think we know about this. Turns out that it can do other things too. So because it's got that whole knowledge base there, and I've not really enforced the guardrails like Paul did with our Right Now, is it will also, of course, write you a lesson plan if you ask it sufficiently nicely. And the thing that came as a surprise to me is it will also do this post-game analysis. So as well as telling you how, what's going to go wrong with your plan, it will tell you what went wrong with your lesson. It does this in a very GPT-like way. So if you make a transcript of the lesson, I think it's much easier to get permission to make a transcript in school than it is to make a recording, or heaven forbid, a video of a lesson. With the transcript, it will do a similar analysis on that. This, again, is not based on an actual trainee's lesson, but is based on the lecture I gave last Wednesday afternoon. We were trying to do some modeling of live coding. So it, of course, refers to my students, trainees, as pupils. But never mind that. Trainees' responses showed engagement, though participation was uneven. Some trainees contributed actively, whilst others remained passive observers, incorporating pair discussion before whole class questioning, using show me tasks where everyone predicts or types a snippet would make checking for understanding more systematic and inclusive. It's good advice. I was there at the time. I know what happened during this lecture, and I think it does a very good job of giving me advice of how I could teach better. I feel much happier taking the advice from the bot reading a transcript than I ever would inviting my colleagues, or indeed my external examiner, Matt, to come in and sit at the back of the room and tell me how to make my teaching better. Other people may feel differently. It could just be me. The one that's been most fun for our trainees was the choose your own behavior adventure. So some of you may be as old as me, unlikely, I know, and remember those Ian Livingstone fighting fantasy adventure books. You know, do you want to fight the dragon? Turn to page 91. Do you want to run away from the dragon? Turn to page 85, and you find your own path through. I've long been a fan for this sort of interactive fiction, and of course you can do this by producing the responses on the fly there. So I've given it 4 starting scenarios, but it's perfectly possible to give it your own. So 2 pupils are fighting in the corridor before the lesson. What are you going to do? So it's going to go off, again, basing it on what it knows about good behavior management strategies, what I've given it in my prompt. Then Jake and Reese. Okay, would be 2 boys. I said pupils, did I not, Victoria? But it's assumed that this is going to be male students who are fighting in the corridors. Okay, so what does it do? Step between them, raise my voice firmly, tell them both to stop immediately. Use a strong, calm voice to instruct them to separate and tell bystanders to move on. Send a nearby responsible pupil to fetch on-call SLT while you monitor the situation from a few steps back. I just watch it direct both boys by name, Jake, Reese, to follow you into the classroom for a private conversation, attempting to remove them from the corridor. So you will all have your own answer to this. If Victoria had enabled the chat, I would have a quick straw poll. What would I do in this circumstance? I want them to be safe. So actually intervening there and preventing anybody actually throwing a punch feels my obligation. So I don't think I'm just going to wait for SLT to turn up. I'm going to go with A, and let's see what damage I do with response A. You don't have to choose from the 4-part list. You can pick and write in your own thing here. Okay, Jake mutters, he started it, whilst Reese shifts his weight like he's ready for another shove. Neither boy has fully de-escalated yet. Other pupils are watching to see what you do next. Now, I've read the Bennett book. He says, get the audience away from this so you can get on. I'm not going to take up more of my time. You can play with this. The link is there on the slides. See how you get on. First time we use this with our trainees, they deliberately tried to break the system. I have put slightly stronger guardrails in subsequently as a result of their attempt to, get it to do something really bad, or see what happened if you did something really bad. So there's the prompt, or is it called a prompt when we put it into a custom GPT? And there's the text over. Oh, sorry. The other thing I can do is just type in stop at the end there, and it should give me an analysis of what I did. Promptly to protect people's safety, that was my argument. Authority and clarity, that's the top that I get to do that. Stopping harm before anything else. DfE, ITT stress teachers must manage behavior safely. Could have put myself at risk here. Behavior curriculum, yeah, okay. How are you going to actually do that at that point? Okay, typical evidence-informed sequence, and maintain safe distance. So they said do it from the distance there rather than straight up. Okay, so we get advice on this as well, and get to play the whole thing again if you want to see whether you can do better the next time. What else have we built? I'm less proud of this one. I think there's some work to do on this. I want to get closer to how do you practice for the core skills of being a teacher, of imparting knowledge, of asking questions, of directing learning, of engaging interest. And I think it's really hard to simulate that with like 30 different voices. it is worth playing with that. What I have got it to do is have a go at that on a one-to-one basis of, can we get to the point of it practicing one of those individual teacher to pupil conversations, when they're cracking on with their work, when they're getting on with something. Teacher walking around the room, getting down to their level, engaging them one-to-one in a learning conversation. It's okay. I think it's tricky for it to play an authentic pupil, because whilst you can say, this is a dyslexic pupil, they're at year 8, they're not particularly interested in computing or whatever, there's a danger that it stereotypes that in a way which actual kids do not conform to. So I think there's way to go here. But anyhow, the prompt is there in the deck. You can practice with it if you would like. And I have got guardrails in place. Never give harmful, unsafe, or inappropriate responses. Give the content suitable for a school environment. And the first one I built of these was the teaching interview bot, as a way of giving them the opportunity to practice for their job interview. So with a little bit of luck, that's a post that's advertised locally for a new computing teacher at a good school. And I then think I can click practice interview, and it should get stuck into this. Okay, let's start with the practice interview. Okay, what subject are you applying for? And on a good day, I can make it do the voice thing here. So what's it asking? What subject am I applying for? Use the updated uploaded job description. Yeah. Hi there. So yeah, I'm applying for this job of computing teacher, and it is using the uploaded job description. Okay. And I'm not going to be able to do that because there's a conflict between the two things. We could type in responses, but I'm conscious I've only got 5 minutes left. What else do we want to talk about? So that's there, and this is the advice here, and these are the things it's been given as training materials or what to base its knowledge on. It's worth saying that the ones I could find were about how to select for STEM posts, and they are a little bit out of date. So I'm not convinced it's going to do an absolutely up-to-the-minute interview, but it does okay with it. So you were, I'm sure, expecting this to be a more academic talk. To start with a review of the literature, I've saved the best bit till the end, and let's just talk a little about some of the work other people have done. Lovely paper here about what happens when you get teachers using these ChatGPT and other language model tools, and does that sort of take that thinking out of this process of professional development as well as professional formation. And in this particular paper, they say no, they actually start thinking about aspects of this in a much more critical and thoughtful sort of way. So, they talk about the challenges and the advantages, and then they did the control trial study of, okay, let's look at a number of things which we might think of as higher order thinking skills for teachers, and do the control trial experiment. So the experimental group here is those who did the input on ChatGPT, who use ChatGPT, and then there's a control group where it's just the normal sort of teacher training for pre-service teachers. And you're getting a whole number of these where you've got a statistically significant impact on these other measures: self-efficacy, higher order thinking, metacognitive thinking, problem-solving ability, and yay, computational thinking for the experiment group who had access to the GPT tools. So yes, we may worry that it makes new teachers lazy, but there is at least some empirical evidence here in one particular study that actually this might get them thinking more rather than thinking less. I don't see that as a bad thing. There are other studies which kind of back this up, of actually, if you use it well, it does get people questioning things and thinking critically. This hallucination problem, I quite like that, because we know we have to think carefully about whatever output it produces. There's other stuff too. So this is Proxima, who've got another digital approximation of practice thing running. I don't think this is AI powered. I think they've written, possibly had the AI write, particular scenarios of this happens in your classroom. And then they're using other trainees to give the feedback on the decision you make. So my understanding of this, never seen it in action, is that it presents a scenario, you type in what you're going to do, and then that gets sent anonymously to other trainees in the cohort who then give you feedback on the response that you gave to the scenario you were presented with. So possibly lower tech, but you could easily combine the two, I'm sure. They've got this at Edge Hill. This is a study, this is a review of this from Edge Hill. There are Edge Hill people on the call. Do tell us more about how this has been going. And where they've tried this Proxima system, digital approximation, did replicate the classroom accurately. Trainees felt that it was an activity that was worthwhile, apply these strategies in their own teaching method. Because it seemed so close to actual classroom practice, it seemed a worthwhile exercise for, I think these were primary trainees. And then there is something interesting going on at the moment using Proxima. Pip is at National Institute for Teaching and so may know more about this. But publicly available is like the privacy declaration from the Behavioural Insights team, who have been commissioned by the Education Endowment Foundation to do a nimble trial with like 150 ECTs this year to see whether using this Proxima system actually has some sort of impact on their, I think it's the second year, no, it's during their ECT training, which follows on, of course, from the initial teacher training. The details will come once they finish the trial, I'm sure, but I think I'd be quite optimistic to see a positive impact from that. It certainly seemed worth at least commissioning the experiment there to the EEF. I think this is pretty much where I close, keeping an eye on the clock there. So I never know whether it's Arthur C. Clarke or David Thornburg. I'm a fan of Arthur C. Clarke, so I'm going to say it's an Arthur C. Clarke quote. Any teacher that can be replaced by a computer deserves to be. The asterisk is to say any tutor, any mentor that can be replaced by a computer deserves to be. I've shown you some ways in which the bot can contribute to this professional formation process, but I don't think we're in danger of losing our jobs just yet, because there is so much more that we do. Some of it is about that sort of emotional support for this process of becoming a teacher. A lot of this is about the contextualization. Reading the transcript is really powerful, but is not the same as being there in the room. And so many of these simulation things we would have once done as role plays, with trainees interviewing other trainees, with trainees allowing trainees to practice their questioning and their teaching skills. And I think that remains part of our practice for a long time to come. The QR code, never scan QR codes that you don't know what they do, is my LinkedIn profile. I suspect I am already connected to many of you there. If you want to see the slides again, then it's at the URL on the slide. I have overrun my time by a minute, which of those of you who've heard me before will know is really quite remarkable in my case. Thank you all very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you. I think join everybody in lots of emoji celebrations there. Look at that. Look at that. It's lovely. Look. See, this digital approximations of joy and thanks there, isn't there? Look at that. That's wonderful.
I very rarely get, what is it, streamers confetti cones being called or indeed conference presentations.
Well, maybe that's what needs to happen moving forwards. If we do it in person, I'm going to get a load of party poppers now. You've got a couple of questions in there. Maybe you can answer them during the next presentation.
All right, I will
as well.
I'm taking up more of your time now. That's fine.
Brilliant. Thanks, Miles. Thank you so much. And
do you think we got away with it?
I'm not so sure.
Better keep an eye on this lot.